I've always been the independent one. At 30, I take pride in the fact that I've been living on my own for the past 7 years. I cover my rent, bills, student loans, all of it. Life hasn't been easy, but I've managed. My parents always taught me that once I was an adult, I had to stand on my own 2 feet. And I took that lesson seriously, grinding through long hours at work, making sacrifices, and living paycheck to paycheck to stay afloat. But a recent visit to my parents' house changed everything. I was helping my dad with some paperwork in their home office when a bank statement slipped out from a pile of documents. I wasn't snooping, it was right there on the table, but what caught my eye was the number, a transfer of several $1,000s. At first, I thought maybe it was a one-time thing, some sort of emergency expense. But then I saw the monthly pattern. The recipient? My younger sibling, Jack. My heart sank. Jack, who's always had an easygoing, carefree lifestyle. No steady job, constantly traveling, posting pictures from exotic beaches, fancy restaurants, and nights out with friends. I had assumed he was just lucky or maybe good at saving from his short-lived jobs. But no, here it was in black and white. My parents have been giving him thousands of dollars every month for the past 2 years. 2 years. I stared at the paper, my mind racing. I had no idea. I'd been working my ass off, struggling to stay ahead of bills, sacrificing weekends for extra shifts, while Jack was living comfortably with a monthly allowance from our parents. And they never said a word. They told us, that once we were adults, we were on our own. I had accepted their reality. So, why was it different for Jack? I was angry, no, furious, and hurt. I didn't know how to react. I shoved the papers back into the pile, my hands trembling. I had to get out of there before I said something I couldn't take back. I left in a rush, making some excuse about needing to get back to work, but my mind was elsewhere. I spent the drive home, replaying everything in my head. All the times I had struggled to make rent, debated calling my parents for help, but stopped myself because I didn't want to seem weak. They made it clear I needed to stand on my own, but apparently, that rule didn't apply to Jack. Now I was left with this sinking feeling. I needed to confront them, but the thought of it made my stomach churn. How could they do this? And why keep it a secret? I had no idea what I'd say to them, but I knew one thing for sure. Pretending like everything was fine wasn't an option anymore. In the days following the discovery, I couldn't get it out of my head. Every time I sat down to pay bills or looked at my shrinking bank balance, the resentment bubbled up inside me. I had been living on a tightrope, scraping by each month, while Jack was being supported like some kind of trust fund kid, without a care in the world. I thought about calling him first, asking what the hell was going on, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized it wasn't Jack's fault. Not entirely. Sure, he probably asked for help, but it was my parents who were bankrolling his life. I couldn't believe they would keep something like this from me. If they wanted to help him out, fine, but why keep it a secret? Why not help both of us? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe Jack had some kind of problem I didn't know about. Maybe they were helping him out of necessity, not favoritism. But no matter how I spun it, the truth was clear. They had lied to me. They had let me struggle and stress over every dollar while quietly supporting Jack's lifestyle. I couldn't decide if I felt more hurt or angry. My mind kept spinning. I thought about every conversation I'd had with my parents over the past 2 years. The times I mentioned being stressed about money, how I was trying to save up for a vacation I could never afford, or how I was cutting back on groceries to make rent. They never offered any help, just a sympathetic nod or a vague, "You'll get through it, you always do." Meanwhile, they were sending Jack thousands every month, and I had no clue. I started drafting text messages to them in my head. Each version got progressively angrier until I had to stop myself. I knew confronting them with raw emotion wasn't the right move. But what was the right move? The thought of sitting down with them made my stomach churn. I didn't want to be the one to break the family apart, but I also couldn't pretend that everything was fine. The betrayal felt too big to ignore. I imagined all the possible outcomes. Maybe they'd admit they were wrong and apologize. Maybe they'd say Jack was in some kind of trouble, and this was their way of helping him through it. But what if they brushed it off? What if they didn't think they'd done anything wrong? That was what I feared the most. That they'd look me in the eye and say I was overreacting, or worse, that I didn't deserve the same help as Jack. The weight of what I discovered sat on my chest, heavy and suffocating. I knew I had to talk to them, but how? How could I confront the people I loved without tearing everything apart? There was no easy answer. But one thing was clear. I couldn't keep this bottled up much longer. I needed answers, even if I wasn't sure I'd like what I found. The next weekend, I went over to my parents' house again. I couldn't keep it in any longer. I'd rehearsed the conversation in my head 100 times, but when I walked through the door, all those words seemed to vanish. My parents greeted me like everything was normal, like they hadn't been hiding a massive secret for 2 years. We sat in the living room, and I finally blurted it out. I found Jack's bank statements. I know you've been giving him money. The room went dead silent. My mom's face turned pale, and my dad shifted uncomfortably in his seat. We weren't hiding anything. Not really, my dad finally said, his voice unsure. Jack's been struggling. We thought it was best to help him out. Struggling? I scoffed. With what? I've been struggling too, but you never offered me a dime. You told me we were on our own, and I believed you. So why does Jack get special treatment? My mom opened her mouth, but hesitated. It's complicated, she said weakly. We didn't want you to feel. We didn't think you needed the help. There was the knife to the gut. They didn't think I needed help. All those months of barely scraping by, of debating whether to swallow my pride and ask for support, and they thought I didn't need it. But Jack? He got it without even asking. I've been working non-stop, stressing about rent and student loans, and you didn't think I needed help? I could feel the anger rising, my voice shaking. Meanwhile, Jack is off traveling and living it up, and you're just funding it. My dad sighed, rubbing his temples. Jack, he hasn't found his footing. He's not like you. You're responsible. You always find a way to make things work. Jack, he's not there yet. He needed a little extra support. A little extra support. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So, because I'm responsible, I get punished for it? And Jack, who can't keep a job for more than 6 months, just gets handed money. My voice was louder now, but I didn't care. My mom reached out, trying to calm me down. It wasn't about choosing between you two. We just thought. You didn't ask. I shouldn't have to ask. I snapped. You told me we were supposed to be independent. You never even gave me the option. They sat there quiet, not knowing what to say. I looked at them, feeling a deep sadness beneath the anger. I had worked so hard to make them proud, to prove I didn't need help, and in the end, all I got was this, being overlooked. I'm not saying Jack doesn't need help, I said, my voice lower now, more controlled. But what hurts is that you never thought I might need it too. You just assumed I'd be fine. And you lied to me. My dad started to say something, but I stood up. I needed space, needed to get out of there before the conversation spiraled any further. I'm going home, I said flatly. As I walked out, I heard my mom call after me, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't. The hurt was too raw, the betrayal too fresh. As they scrambled to justify their actions, I sat there in disbelief. My dad began explaining how Jack's life wasn't as carefree as it appeared. He's hit some rough patches and things have been harder for him than you realize, he said, his tone defensive. He hasn't been able to hold down a steady job. We just wanted to help him get back on his feet. My mom quickly added, we didn't want you to feel burdened, honey. You've always been so strong, so capable. We didn't want to add to your stress. Jack, he's just different. He needs more help. I could feel my anger bubbling beneath the surface. So, because I'm capable, I get nothing? You reward Jack for being irresponsible and leave me in the dark because I've worked hard to make it on my own? How does that make sense? They both fell silent. My dad sighed, avoiding my gaze, and my mom's eyes welled up with tears. We didn't mean to hurt you. We didn't think you'd take it this way. You've always been so independent. We just assumed you didn't need anything from us. The more they talked, the more I realized they didn't get it at all. This wasn't about whether I needed the money. It was about trust and fairness. It was about being treated as an equal, not being left out because I was too responsible to require their help. Do you not understand how betrayed I feel? I said, my voice trembling. You helped him behind my back for years. Did you ever think about how I'd feel if I found out? If I had known from the start, I might not even have cared. But you kept it from me like I didn't deserve the same kind of support because I didn't ask. That's what hurts. My mom dabbed her eyes with a tissue, looking at me helplessly. We just didn't want to make you feel like we doubted your ability to take care of yourself. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So, you let me struggle, thinking I had to do it all alone because I'm the capable one? All while Jack got a free pass. They didn't respond, just sat there, my dad still staring at the floor and my mom trying to hold herself together. The room was heavy with tension. They hadn't meant to hurt me, I believed that, but their decisions showed me how little they understood the emotional toll of being left out. It wasn't just about money. It was about being seen, about them acknowledging that my struggles mattered too. I don't want your money, I said, standing up. But I needed to know I could count on you, that you had my back just like you had his. And now I don't know if I can trust that anymore. They were speechless, and I could feel the weight of everything pressing down on me. The trust one once had in them was shaken, maybe beyond repair. As I left their house, a mix of anger and sadness settled in my chest, knowing that things between us would never be the same. A few days after confronting my parents, I knew the next step was to talk to Jack. I couldn't move forward without understanding why he'd been okay with taking money from our parents for years without ever telling me. I didn't want this to drive a permanent wedge between us, but the betrayal ran deep, and we needed to clear the air. We met up at a quiet coffee shop, the same place we'd gone to as kids after school for hot chocolates. The familiarity of the setting made what I was about to say even harder. After some strained small talk, I decided to just rip the Band-Aid off. "I know Mom and Dad have been helping you out financially," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but failing to hide the edge of resentment. Jack's expression changed instantly. The relaxed, easygoing look disappeared, and he shifted in his seat, suddenly avoiding eye contact. He stirred his coffee absent-mindedly, staring into the cup like it held the answer to everything. "Yeah," he finally muttered, his voice quieter than I expected. "I figured you'd find out eventually." There was the confirmation I had dreaded. I had hoped, in some part of me, that maybe he didn't know the full extent of the help our parents were giving him. But he did. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, the bitterness in my voice barely concealed. Jack sighed deeply, rubbing the back of his neck, still avoiding eye contact. "Because I didn't want you to think less of me. I know you've been doing everything on your own, and I didn't want you to look at me like some failure." I was stunned by his admission. "Think less of you?" I echoed. "Jack, you're my brother. I wouldn't have cared if you needed help, but the secrecy, the fact that everyone kept it from me, it feels like you didn't trust me, like you were ashamed of me or something." Finally, Jack looked up, guilt written all over his face. "It's not like that," he said, shaking his head. "I know it's not fair. I know it probably feels like I'm getting everything handed to me while you're out there busting your ass. But I'm not like you, man. I couldn't handle it. You've always had your life together. Me? I've been struggling to figure things out, and every time I thought I was making progress, I'd hit a wall." I listened, but my anger was still simmering beneath the surface. "So what? You just decided to keep it a secret? You could have been honest with me." Instead, I had to find out by accident. After 2 years, he winced at my words, his shame palpable. "I know," he said quietly. "I didn't want it to be this way. But every time I thought about telling you, I chickened out. I was embarrassed. I felt like a failure, and I knew you'd be disappointed." I sighed, leaning back in my chair. Part of me understood where he was coming from. Jack had always been the carefree one, the one who never quite figured things out, and I'd always been the responsible older brother. But understanding didn't erase the betrayal. "You could have trusted me," I said, my voice softer now. "We're brothers, Jack. We're supposed to look out for each other. But instead, you let me struggle while you were being helped behind the scenes. That's what hurts the most." He didn't have a response to that. He just sat there, looking down at his coffee, his guilt hanging in the air between us. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted to hurt you." I nodded, taking a deep breath. "I know, but we can't just pretend this didn't happen. Things are going to be different between us, Jack. I don't know how we fix this, but I can't ignore how I feel." Jack looked up at me, his eyes filled with regret. "I'll make it right," he promised. Somehow, as we left the coffee shop, I couldn't shake the feeling that our relationship had changed forever. We had been brothers our whole lives, but now, there was a gap between us, a gap that might never fully close. After hearing Jack's side, I walked away from that coffee shop, feeling more conflicted than ever. Sure, he had admitted that he wasn't proud of being supported by our parents, but the fact that he accepted the money so easily, knowing full well what I'd been going through, still felt like a slap in the face. It wasn't just about him being supported. It was that he never once thought to tell me, or worse, that he didn't even try to help when he knew I was struggling. And what did he mean when he said he wasn't like me? Was that supposed to be an excuse for letting Mom and Dad bankroll his life while I scraped by on my own? The more I stewed on it, the more it started to feel like my whole family dynamic had been built on a lie. And it wasn't something I could just shrug off. The hurt was deeper than the money. It was about the trust. I'd always trusted my parents to treat us equally, to be upfront about the big things, but now I couldn't help but see it all differently. My mind kept spinning through old memories, recalling moments from our childhood. Maybe I'd missed the signs all along. How Jack got away with things I would have been punished for. How he was always excused for his mistakes while I was expected to be responsible. It all started to feel like a puzzle I was just now piecing together, and the realization made my stomach turn. That weekend, I couldn't face them. I needed space to process everything. So I ignored calls from my parents and skipped the usual family dinner. I didn't know how to interact with them right now, not without exploding into a conversation I wasn't ready for. Distancing myself felt necessary, even if it meant more questions from them and the awkward silence that would follow. I needed to figure out what I wanted. Cutting them off completely seemed drastic, but how could I pretend like everything was normal when the foundation of our relationship was built on this secret imbalance? Jack tried to reach out too. He sent me a couple of texts apologizing again, telling me he didn't mean for things to turn out this way. I read them, but I didn't reply. What was I supposed to say? Thanks for admitting it after 2 years? The apology felt hollow when he had kept quiet for so long, knowing how hard things were for me. I found myself growing more distant from everything. Work, friends, even things I used to enjoy. There was this underlying tension gnawing at me, and I didn't know how to fix it. My family was supposed to be my support system, the people I could count on no matter what. But now, it felt like they had built this wall between us without me knowing. It wasn't just about Jack anymore. It was about Mom and Dad too. How could they let this happen? How could they look me in the eye, week after week, knowing they were helping Jack while I was barely getting by? I started questioning everything. Maybe this had been going on longer than I realized. Maybe they had always been more concerned about Jack. The memories of my struggles, when I was barely able to cover rent or when I was eating ramen noodles for weeks on end, flashed before me. I had been so proud of myself for pushing through, for making it work on my own. But now, it felt like I was the one left behind while they coddled him. I wasn't ready to confront them again, but I couldn't sit with this forever. Something had to change, but I wasn't sure what that looked like yet. All I knew was that my family wasn't what I thought it was, and I wasn't sure if it ever would be again. After a few weeks of silence, the tension finally broke when my parents showed up at my apartment unannounced. I wasn't ready for this confrontation, not emotionally, not mentally, but it seemed like they were. The moment I opened the door, my dad wasted no time. "We need to talk," he said, his voice firm, lacking any warmth. There wasn't an ounce of fatherly concern in his tone, just a demand for answers, for resolution, on his terms. I stepped aside and let them in, though every instinct told me to slam the door shut and avoid this conversation. My mom sat down on the couch, her hands nervously wringing together, while my dad stood, pacing like he had to burn off the agitation pulsing through him. I sat opposite them, waiting for someone to say something that made sense. But instead, my dad started, "You can't just shut us out like this, son. We're family." His words made me scoff bitterly. Family? Family doesn't keep secrets. Family doesn't make one child struggle while they hand everything on a silver platter to the other. My voice was calm, but it was laced with years of pent-up frustration. I had been wrestling with this for weeks, and I was done playing nice. My mom, ever the peacekeeper, spoke softly. "We didn't mean for it to feel like that. We thought Jack needed more help. You've always been so independent. We didn't want to burden you with his problems. Do you hear yourself?" I said, my anger rising. "You didn't want to burden me? While I've been barely scraping by, struggling to pay bills, you were giving Jack thousands of dollars every month, and you kept that from me. How is that not a burden?" My dad stopped pacing and turned toward me, his jaw tight, the sternness of his expression only deepening. "We did what we thought was best. Jack's not as strong as you. He needed help. We were just trying to keep him from falling apart." "And what about me?" I demanded, my voice cracking slightly. "Did you ever stop to think that maybe I needed help too? That maybe, just maybe, I was too proud to ask because you raised me to believe I had to stand on my own?" The silence in the room after that was suffocating. My mom started to cry softly, her tears falling on her lap, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. I was too hurt, too frustrated, and too tired of being the one who was always expected to handle things without any support. My dad, still standing, didn't offer any kind words. He just stared, as if trying to figure out what to say next. "We never meant for you to feel this way," my mom eventually said through her tears. "We just thought you had everything under control. You never asked for help, so we assumed you didn't need it." "That's the problem," I muttered, shaking my head. "You assumed. You never bothered to ask me how I was doing. You just focused on Jack." For a long time, none of us spoke. The weight of years of unspoken feelings hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. I could feel my relationship with my parents breaking down in front of me, and as much as it hurt, it also felt like the truth was finally coming out, ugly as it was. I had carried the weight of their expectations and Jack's carefree lifestyle for too long, and I couldn't bear it anymore. My dad sighed heavily and finally sat down next to my mom, the tension visibly draining from his body. "I'm sorry, son," he said quietly. "We didn't realize how much this hurt you. We just thought we were doing what was right." Doing what's right would have meant being there for both of your kids. I replied, my voice softening, though the hurt remained. Not just one. My mom reached out to me then, her hand trembling. We'll fix this, she promised. We'll make it right, I swear. I looked at them both, my parents who I had once trusted without question, and realized I wasn't sure if I could believe that anymore. Things had changed, and even if they wanted to fix this, I wasn't sure if the damage could be undone. After that painful conversation, my relationship with my parents fractured in ways I wasn't prepared for. They apologized, sure, but their words felt empty. Every time they tried to explain or justify their decision to support Jack financially, it only deepened the wedge between us. They didn't seem to grasp at their reasoning. How they saw me as the strong one and Jack as needing more help didn't undo the damage. In fact, it made it worse. Their apologies were like band-aids on a gaping wound. Without realizing it, I started pulling away. I skipped out on family dinners, opting to make excuses about work. When holidays came around, I found reasons to be busy or made last-minute plans with friends. It wasn't a calculated decision to distance myself at first, but the avoidance grew as the weeks turned into months. I couldn't sit at the same table, pretending things were normal, while knowing that they had kept such a huge secret for so long. Jack and I barely spoke. He reached out a couple of times, sending casual texts or dropping in to say we should hang out. I think he was trying to patch things up, but every conversation felt stilted and uncomfortable. The elephant in the room was always there. He didn't fully understand how deeply this had affected me. How could he? He had always been the one cushioned by our parents, while I had struggled in silence. I think part of him assumed I'd get over it eventually, but this wasn't something I could just brush off. At work, I threw myself into my projects more than ever before. I started staying late, taking on extra tasks, anything to keep my mind busy. On the outside, it looked like I was thriving, focused, productive, and independent, just like my parents had always described me. But the truth was, I felt more alone than I had in a long time. I wasn't used to asking for help, and now I didn't even know if I could. The anger I felt toward my parents and Jack was festering, making it hard to connect with anyone else. I told myself I didn't need their support. I was fine on my own, but that hollow feeling, the one that lingered after I found out about their financial favoritism, kept growing. It felt like I was carrying an invisible weight, one that I wasn't sure how to unload. And no matter how hard I tried to focus on work or distract myself with other things, the distance between my family and me only seemed to widen. As the months rolled by, I slowly began to accept that the distance between me and my family was the new normal. My parents' half-hearted apologies had stopped coming, and I had stopped expecting them. Therapy had helped me find a way to manage my anger and disappointment. I had come to terms with the fact that the relationship I thought I had with my parents and Jack wasn't what I had believed. It was a hard pill to swallow, but I realized that holding on to resentment wasn't going to fix anything. It was only going to drag me down further. One afternoon, I got a message from Jack. He asked if we could meet up. For a moment, I hesitated, unsure if I wanted to reopen the wound. But part of me knew that things couldn't stay unresolved forever. I agreed to meet him for coffee, more out of curiosity than anything else. When I arrived at the cafe, Jack was already there, sitting quietly at a corner table. As I approached, he stood to greet me. He looked nervous, but there was something different about him this time. He wasn't hiding behind his usual carefree attitude. He looked at me directly, with a seriousness I wasn't used to seeing. "Thanks for meeting me," he said, his voice sincere. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since everything happened, and I realized how messed up things were. I took Mom and Dad's help for granted. I didn't think about how it made you feel, and that was wrong,